decided this time that we would actually record the session, because believe it or not, there are people who can't make it and have wished to see things. And sadly, we didn't record the earlier two, so they are lost to posterity. But Helen has been very kind to say that she doesn't mind being videoed. So I think the most important thing I could say is if you could all try and keep yourself on mute. Now, Garth will mute everybody, but if you're on a phone, I think you need to mute yourself. And just because we are recording it, it's much nicer really that we don't have those interruptions. But when we get to the end and have a chat and have questions, then obviously there'll be a bit more of a free-for-all. And the idea is that we'll put the recording available for members. Obviously, you may or may not want to see it again, but there are another, a few hundred or 200 other members who may well want to see it. And I think it would be really great, and it's very kind of Helen. So that leads me to Helen Tapper, President of the FIS, the Finishers and Interiors sector, sorry, get the name right. I'm sure Helen will correct me. The plastering industry has the FIS, if you like, as the nearest thing to a trade body. And Helen is the president. She took over the role at the end of last year. We've seen her at least a couple of times in Plasterers Hall. She came to the training awards in November of last year, and the FIS actually hold an awards ceremony in the hall. And they have a bumper turnout of people, and they award prizes, a bit like our training awards. So there's an awful lot of close synergy with the FIS. And if John Riley joins the call, he may be there now. John, who's one of our liverymen, is actually on the board of FIS. So I think that will mean that there'll be a lot more engagement with FIS as things go forward. Helen runs her own business. She's said in her office at the moment in Banbury. It's an interiors business. And I think it's fair to say it's a small or medium-sized business. That is actually under 250 employees, so it's not small in some senses, but that's the definition is given. And she's very much triumphing what SMEs do in her time as president. But obviously she represents the whole of the finishing trade. So I'm going to shut up. Helen is going to try and magically share the screen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. I'll go on to...
Yeah, good.
Hurrah!
Well done, brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. I realise that we all spend much time in the current climate logged in to remote meetings and presentations, so thank you for your time. The new normal seems to involve many sessions staring at little tiles of people on a screen. I can honestly say that I prefer to meet people in the flesh, but I hope I can give you something informative and interesting to take away with you. As Alison said, my name is Helen Tapper. I'm the current president of the FIS, or the Finishes and Interiors sector. We're a trade body representing the entire supply chain of this sector, commonly called fit out. That's a pretty picture of a swanky office fit out, showing a breakout area, which is very common in refurbishments now. But it's important to note that our members work across the domestic, commercial and industrial sectors. So we're obviously part of the construction sector, and as you can see from those stats, a very important part, with 11% of UK construction spend on fit out, and each building requiring up to 30 fit outs during its life cycle. I always find that statistic quite astounding. So we represent the sector by ongoing vetting of contractors, setting higher standards and driving quality through a focus on product, process, people. PPP is something that we like to refer to often as really a representation of the entire supply chain, product being the manufacturers and distributors, process being the contractors, and people being the community that FIS fosters in order to promote that quality. So we've already highlighted the purpose or the mission statement, if you like, of the organisation and explained covering the scope of the supply chain. But the important points on this slide are the trades listed at the bottom there that the fit out sector cover. They're all classed as final fix or finishing trades. That's the gloss, if you like, that we add to the structure of the building. So ceilings, facades, partitions, plastering, dry lining, and specialist interior fit out. You can see there, as Alison said, that we represent the plastering sector, which is where we overlap with the plaisterers, who obviously you have an interest in promoting and supporting the sector. As Alison also said, my day job is the Business Operations Director for a fit-out company called Tapper Interiors based in Banbury in Oxfordshire. As you can tell, it's a family business. And although I'm an engineer by trade, I came here to help out whilst on maternity leave, and that was 20 years ago. It's pretty common for specialist contracting businesses to be family run. I'm therefore an elected president, chair of the elected board, made up of contractors, manufacturers and distributors whose purpose is to hold our CEO, Ian McKilwee, and his team to account on behalf of the membership. So what do our members build? Well, that's a pretty typical office refurb, showing the ceilings, glass partitions, they're Crittall style, currently very on trend. You'll have seen lots in central London. Flooring, a lot of our members would also undertake the flooring and even the furniture in some cases. Car showrooms, that's a shameless plug for my own business. We're pretty niche and are heavily involved in the motor marketplace, but it's certainly an important part of the sector as there's much investment in car showrooms. They get refurbished pretty frequently. Heritage plastering, that's an amazing example of an award-winning project by Locker and Riley, and as Alison said, John Riley being one of your members. It's pretty reminiscent of your amazing ceilings in Plaisterers Hall, of course. Bowling alley, as you can see, we do churn out some pretty amazing projects. So the focus for today is the effect of Covid-19 on our sector and our response to it. It's funny how that horrid picture of a virus is now ingrained into the public psyche. So the UK went into lockdown on the 23rd of March. Nothing sends the construction sector into panic quicker than the words stay at home, work from home with the horrible proviso where possible, social distancing and avoid public transport. They were all things that the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech. It's not difficult to work out that the average construction operative can do none of those things. And all of the rhetoric surrounding lockdown was counterintuitive to trying to run a construction site. The knee-jerk reaction, therefore, for all but essential works, such as hospitals and infrastructure, was to shut and assess the damage. Believe me, owning a specialist contracting business was not fun during this period. Such was the confusion that the Telegraph interviewed Ian McKilwee, our CEO, along with other construction industry chiefs, and they all echoed our position. Builders dispute Boris Johnson's claim that they are able to social distance while on construction sites. Construction industry chiefs have voiced their anger as firms scramble to understand if building sites should stay open. You can't actually see Ian's quote there at the bottom, but all you need to know is that the first line read, "We are in limbo right now." It's also important to note that in Scotland, all construction sites were closed and actually only opened last week. So for our Scottish members, the situation was very different and added to the general confusion. Then, a little over a week later, 31st of March, we got this letter from Alok Sharma, the business secretary. In these challenging times, I want to pay tribute to all those who are working tirelessly within the construction industry. He goes on to say, our country and our economy needs all your support, and the construction industry has answered the call to action. Whether by building temporary hospital wards, installing complex and life-saving oxygen system, he then describes another load of sort of essential projects. The government has advised that wherever possible, people should work at home. However, we know that for many people working in construction, their job requires them to travel to their place of work, and they can continue to do so. This is consistent with the Chief Medical Officer's advice. To help ensure that it's safe for you to operate in your workplace, the industry has worked to develop site operating procedures, which were published by the Construction Leadership Council. The first problem with that letter is that the Secretary referred to key essential projects essential for fighting COVID and for keeping infrastructure running. He continued to do this in the coming weeks whenever construction was mentioned. Well, that refers to a small minority of our sector's contracts, and personally, I couldn't reconcile a car showroom as being essential. The second problem was that although the Secretary said we were free to travel to work, the media were against us. Every day, pictures of construction workers crammed in on the tube were circulated in the press and on social media. The third problem were the site operating procedures, which in their first draft clearly stated that 2-metre social distancing should be enforced. When the CLC, or the Construction Leadership Council, realised this was unworkable, they were quickly amended, but once again, the public and the media didn't seem to have a grasp on this. If you add in the very real fear of sending our operatives, some of whom we will have known and worked with for 20 years, to sites where they might get infected, and all the moral and social considerations that poses, then it was no surprise that many distributors and contractors remained closed. So in response to all the confusion, Ian decided that it was time to roll his sleeves up and formulate a plan to give guidance, assist best practice, and give moral support to those members that had decided to work on. It's important to note that many members had absolutely no choice. For those working for the large Tier 1 contractors that decided not to shut, they were contractually obliged to carry on with their contracts. Any delays could have resulted in financial penalties associated with delay clauses. The risk management toolkit was therefore born. This document evolved over the 11 weeks into a very concise aid to all problems associated with the crisis, from how to get to work safely, how to operate safely once you were at work, how to protect the operatives' families on arriving home. There seemed to be judgment calls to make daily for employers on everything from furlough to PPE. Ian sent out daily mail shots to all members detailing updates to the toolkit, and there were links to all relevant government information, site operating procedures, and legal and banking information to deal with financial problems. It then became pretty apparent that the biggest problem for any contractor trying to operate through a pandemic was how on earth you carried out construction operations and comply with social distancing. Probably the only important sentence on this document for your understanding is the top right sentence. guidance from the Construction Leadership Council is that all construction sites should assess their situation, and those sites that cannot implement the site operating procedures safely should not remain open. But we had members under pressure to do so, and therefore the Health and Safety Task Force was born. This consisted of members coming together to discuss every single operation carried out by our sector and how it could be achieved safely. They were assigned traffic lights according to the operation's risk level and graded accordingly. This was a massive body of work, and it was quite astounding that it was achieved in such a short space of time. It's important to note that the second draft of the site operating procedures did not say that you can't ever get within 2 meters of another operative, merely that the time should be minimized, 15 minutes typically, and that the operatives involved should be wearing appropriate PPE whilst in proximity to each other. PPE, this was a major problem at the start of the crisis. I'm sure you're all very well aware of the term PPE, or personal protective equipment, as it hit the headlines early on in the crisis and became interminable after that. Now, it's all very well the CLC, or the Construction Leadership Council, telling us to use appropriate PPE, but A, there was an international shortage, and B, surely any supplies that were available should have been diverted to the NHS, not construction. Once again, massive judgment calls had to be made by our members. Construction has always needed PPE, and in particular face masks for dust protection. So we weren't just facing a COVID crisis, but the very real possibility that we were breaching health and safety legislation by not having the correct equipment. Ian kept everyone up to date with ever-changing availability of supply and government legislation. You'll notice there that this PPE advice was listed under the Covid-19 hub, which evolved to be the portal where all this new documentation was housed. It then became apparent that we needed to get data from our membership as to what situation they were in regarding operations, and also what their main problems were, in order to offer the most constructive advice. These surveys were sent out on a weekly basis so that we could get an idea of the evolving picture. So this first slide asks you where you sit really on the supply chain. So are you a manufacturer or a distributor, a main contractor? It also shows you that our membership is largely made up of specialist subcontractors, the vast majority of our membership. The second slide asks how many of your sites are open. You can see there that roughly 10% or 9.2% were shut entirely. Roughly 10% or 11.2% were totally open. So a very broad spectrum there. This obviously changed a lot as the crisis developed. Here's the very important question: can you operate safely under the new site operating procedures? This is quite a good reflection of the traffic light system that I referred to earlier. 35% said yes, but not on all tasks, and roughly 20% or 19.2% said yes, but not on all projects. Astoundingly though, nearly 40% said yes, they could operate safely. So that is amazing what you can achieve in such a short space of time. But, and here's the big but, can you operate profitably under the new site operating procedures? Only 12% said yes in all cases. You might like to decide for yourselves from that what the next 12 months will look like in our sector. There were some 50 questions in each survey, but for fear of you falling asleep, I've just showed the salient points. From all of this data, we were able to target the advice and support and really drill down to the root of the problem, which actually showed itself as productivity, as every operation was taking longer, resulting in decreased profit margins. We were also able to offer twice weekly webinars based on the info from those surveys. These were conducted by construction specialists or lawyers and accountants. Within a few weeks, members were running into considerable cash flow problems and needed help with everything from claiming the CJRS, that was the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, or commonly known as furlough, to filling in CBILS loan applications, that's Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. They needed advice on minimising fixed costs, and these were a real lifeline actually for members, who many were feeling very confused, very anxious and very much alone. So finally, all sites started to reopen. We actually opened our doors here on the 11th of May in common with many members. And slowly, the restart for many began. It became apparent that really the crisis had been split into three parts: hibernation or blind panic, hiatus, where some sites were operating but many were closed, and then the new normal, where we are all trying to work within a new framework. You can see all the focus activities listed for the FIS on the right there, most of which I've already talked through here. For most people, opening their sites required a huge amount of work and planning. And so this return to work outline plan was formulated, split into commercial and legal or contractual issues, people or the workforce, safety or health and safety issues, cash flow, so that the things we discussed previously, furlough, CBILS, grants, and the supply chain. Something we haven't really touched on here is the fact that many manufacturers stopped their production lines, so materials were simply in short supply or not available. Once again, all this documentation was available on the Covid-19 hub. This is what the hub looks like if you go to the FIS website. It's split there into health and safety, legal, contractual, and employment, and then the return to work risk management checklist that we just viewed. There are also daily updates on the website, as you can see. London transport information, some information on bogus masks that were being distributed without a CE mark, and one that I've had to use this week: what to do if an employee develops symptoms of COVID-19. This is all updated daily on the website. Just a nice little quote to finish from one of our members. The FIS have risen to the challenge of recent weeks and been both an exceptional support to our team and in fighting our corner as a business. It has reinforced why we are members. The ongoing work it does in uniting our community and helping to attack problems head on, and at the same time work to raise standards within the sector, is more important now than ever as the industry rebuilds. Together, we are stronger. That's a note that I'm very happy to finish with. Together, we are stronger. If we achieved anything through this dreadful crisis, I hope it is that we stood united with integrity and respect, and helped our membership to feel a little less alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. Fantastic. Great PowerPoint as well. So I'm really glad that worked with the everything happening. So that was fantastic.
I'm back.
Great, good. Oh well, and everybody's still smiling, so that's good.
Sorry, I tried to make it, like I said, COVID tends to be very data heavy, and it can be a bit turgid. So I tried to pick out the salient points.
No, absolutely fascinating, Helen, because to actually go through an industry, like the interiors industry in that sort of detail, most of us, if we are in a business ourselves, obviously we'll have had to done something similar. But the fact that not all of us know about the plastering industry, although I will be turning to some of our plasterers who are online and ask them to ask a question in a minute if they don't volunteer. But in the first place, can I just ask you about, you were talking about the supply chain briefly, and I know that British Gypsum did possibly come under some, well, not some criticism. The fact is they'd had to close their factories, so they weren't manufacturing. And then they put out a notice to say that, they would be able to supply, but obviously it was limited. So they were going to just be going through the orders in the order they got them. Nobody can jump the gun on that. It is, just to answer on the plastering business, do you know if plasterboard is back now readily available, or is
it is. Yeah, there was a lot of consternation at the start, as you say, about BG. I mean, to be fair, they needed to shut their production lines in order to work out how they could operate safely. I mean, production in a way is very similar to construction. You've got a lot of people in a small space on production lines. I mean, a lot of people did shut down their production lines just for a couple of weeks while they worked out how to operate safely. There was a lot of concern at the start. I think BG themselves were quite confident that they were going to be able to maintain a supply. And of course, as it's worked out, sites have been pretty slow to open. And I think people thought that within a few weeks, construction was going to get back to normal, and everybody would need the capacity that they'd previously needed. It just didn't work like that. And so I think it's almost now a problem that's almost fully disappeared. I think plasterboard itself is not. I'm not 100% sure on the plaster products, but I certainly haven't heard anything in the last week to suggest that there's an issue. So I think it's fine now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask people to either indicate or put it in the chat room in a minute. But I've just got another question, because I think you perhaps know I'm a lawyer, a solicitor, and I'm afraid to say that lawyers usually make money out of whatever the situation, whether it's good or bad. And clearly you talked about contracts where people couldn't comply because they couldn't work. And obviously now they might not be able to comply because all the bits to the chain are all together. I mean, doing any kind of construction work is a real jigsaw if everybody being in the right place at the right time with supplies arriving and planning permissions and regulatory and stuff like that. One thing goes wrong and the whole thing goes wrong, and you often end up in litigation. And I was really interested to see that there was a sort of statement that people in the construction industry should actually seek to sort these issues out on site and not actually resort to litigation. Now, do you think that's realistic? Have you seen anything of that? Well, it's undermined.
It was just asking people to sign up to it, though, wasn't it? As a goodwill charter, isn't that correct? There was no legal weight behind it, was there? Once again, as with the material supply issues, everybody thought that this was going to be a major issue. And I think pretty much everyone has worked together and got round the issues. It was in the tier one contractors' interests to be reasonable and to work with people rather than implement clauses in contracts. So I think it has worked, and I think it's been okay. I'm not saying that there haven't been members that have got into contractual issues, but I think they've been a lot less. There have been a lot less than we anticipated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Terry, you going to ask a question?
Yes, I thought you might just bring me in at that point. Hello, Helen.
Hi.
Excellent presentation. I must say, as a retired plastering contractor, I'm extremely glad to be a retired plastering.
Yes. Can I join you?
Yes, it's wonderful, but unfortunately you don't get any rest. It's just as busy when you're retired. And I must say it was slightly ironic that, having started a project to completely rebuild my kitchen, the only stumbling block was 14 sheets of plasterboard and 6 bags of multi-finish, which actually the plasterboard came from Gloucester and the multi-finish came from Dewsbury. So that's just how far away my materials have travelled to get into my kitchen. My biggest concern going forward is basically what I've spent my life a lot of time with is apprenticeships. And I'm very sorry to hear what has happened, because clearly if you take the social distancing problem, if you had an apprentice that you were mentoring, the last thing that you could afford to do is having coming from his family background and having the opportunity to mentor. So if I look around, the feedback that I've had from colleges is anything from apprentices having been actually laid off and literally sacked, which is what's basically happened within the studio industry. And unfortunately, a lot of apprenticeships where we expect them to prove their competence, Helen. They've got to be competent. That's the whole important point. And you can't prove somebody is competent if they can't work on site.
No.
And we've got 2 problems now. We've got people who've been halfway through, or maybe 2/3 of the way through the college education, and to be honest, they haven't got the jobs to look forward to. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be one of the biggest problems of the future. I think you've done a fabulous job in the FIS from the feedback that I've had in managing for your members what has been an absolute minefield. I mean, the government have got absolutely no idea how the construction industry works.
Well, they think we all work outside. That was the first thing that became apparent. And interiors kind of gives it away, doesn't it? But
it does indeed. So I don't know how we, as a livery company, both as the plasterers being affiliated to our core trade, and the livery movement in general, can help with employment for apprentices going forward.
Well, that's quite a tricky one, Helen.
Yeah, I think this is compounded, this problem, by the fact that the CITB have just cut all grants, grant funding. So we actually had on our we had a whole training arm, as you know, of the FIS. And our funding was cut, and it wasn't just cut. They didn't give us a month's notice as they normally do. We had a week's notice. So yeah.
But am I not CITB? We might just want to explain to people, but the CIT, Construction Industry Training Board, it levies people in the construction industry. They have to pay a certain amount to this board, and then the board uses it for training. Is that right, roughly how it works?
Yes. You apply for training grants, and certainly with, as Terry was saying, certainly with regard to apprentices, you get quite large grants from the CITB for employing apprentices.
Yeah. But am I not right in thinking that CITB has stopped levying the payments from the construction?
They've stopped. Yes.
They haven't got the money, therefore they can't give it out. But
no,
then in
that's
fact,
right.
The whole training chain, which we all know is so important in any business, any profession, is training needs to keep going. And actually, if the government want the economy to pick up and to keep moving forward, we're going to need more and more people coming in.
And I think Terry is right. This is the forgotten consequence, if you like, of this crisis. And I don't have an answer yet. I don't think anybody has yet come up with an answer. I don't think the colleges have yet worked out how they're going to operate. They're still shut. We've got 2 apprentices, and we use a training facility in Kidlington, and they're keeping in contact, but they're not open yet. We've still got a lot of people on furlough, so our apprentices are on furlough. I don't know. All I can say is we need to work together to try and find a way forward, and hopefully within a few months we can formulate a plan to get back to where we were. I mean, I know we were trying to support the new plastering apprenticeship because that ran into problems, didn't it? But everybody is going to be have less resources, not just in terms of finance, but in terms of people, because the FIS has now had to furlough some of its training staff. You're right, Terry, it's a terrible mess.
Well, please don't, I mean, it's not a question you can answer tonight, but as it goes on in the future, please do come to us if there's anything that you think
thank you.
We, as either the plasterers livery or the livery movement in general, and we do have some small influence, perhaps only in the city, Alison, but the city's quite a decent place to work.
I think we all need to assess. We still don't really know the full impact on the sector, and until we know that, I think we're getting the impression now that until furlough ends, we're not going to know what the true impact is. It's propping us all up. That's my feeling. It's propping us all up at the moment. And what happens when that ends? Do we go over a cliff edge, or do we slowly start to rebuild? I'm quite hopeful, actually, that it's not going to be a cliff edge. I mean, it's clearly going to be a recession, but hopefully not a cliff edge, in which case I would hope that many of our members do honour their commitments to their apprentices.
On that point, can we pass to Liveryman Tim Butcher, who had his hand up to ask a question? Tim.
Thank you very much, Master. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, good. I've pressed the right button. It's always a bit of a challenge. Thank you, Helen, for your presentation. I very much enjoyed that. You did touch on this just towards the end of your presentation. What happens if an employee shows symptoms of COVID, and what happens to the workforce and the company? COVID isn't going to go away, and we're going to be living with this for some months, if not years. So how are companies going to react to that, and do they have a process in place? Thank you.
Yes. I mean, in order to start working again, we all had to have a COVID-specific policy. We also had to do RAMs, so that's risk assessments and method statements for all construction operations, but also office operations. So the process is that we ask our workforce to send us a text every evening confirming that they feel well, and that anybody, what people are working on sites in teams or pods. They're sometimes referred to as pods, sometimes as teams, and you keep the team as small as you possibly can, and you never let the teams overlap. So they travel together. I mean, we have a fleet of vans, so they need to travel together, but those people that travel together must also work together. And we try to keep our teams to 2 operatives. Then once they're on site, if they have to come within 2 meters of each other, they do, wearing the appropriate PPE, which thankfully is you can now get. So within those teams, they text us every evening to tell us that they and the whole pod are feeling well. So I got a text last Wednesday to say that one of our workforce was not feeling very well. And they did sound like COVID symptoms. So we then asked him to immediately go home. Also, the young man that he was working with and had worked with that day also had to stay at home. This was last Wednesday evening, I got on the government website immediately, booked the test. This was at 8 o'clock. They texted Ashley back within an hour and he was booked in to a test centre in Oxford at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, and we had the results back the following day. So I have to say, I mean, it did sound in that presentation as if I was criticising the government a bit. Some of what they've done, in fact, a lot of what they've done has been pretty astounding. The furlough scheme and the furlough portal is astounding. I went through the CBILS process, that's the bank loan system. That was astounding. The statutory sick pay scheme is astounding. And I have to say, this testing procedure seems to be pretty efficient and pretty well run. So we were able then to release both Ashley and his workmate for work, and they were back at work on Monday morning. So that, and it was negative, thank God. So it was brilliant. But that's, yes, that's how we will handle it going forwards.
Great, thank you.
Hi,
now,
John. I can see John up on the screen. Was that John?
Has John arrived? Master-elect Margaret Coates, you've asked a question on the chat. Would you mind asking it to Helen?
Yes. Hello, Helen. Nice seeing you again.
Hi. Hi, Margaret.
Impressive presentation, and
thank you.
Work that Ian has done with and his team is absolutely.
Ian has been
absolutely
astounding. Incredible. He's put so many hours into this. Astounding.
I'm very impressed, and you can tell.
Yeah.
No, I'm just anxious. I mean, I understand you have about 10,000 members, and I'm just wondering how many you expect to still be in business at the end of this crisis. I think you answered that earlier on, I think, by saying until the furloughing stops, you really will not know. But how many of your members do you think will be out of business?
So far, and this has also been something that we've been incredibly surprised about. We haven't lost any members, and we haven't even, so most of our subscriptions come in by direct debit, and Jane, our operations director, was fully expecting a lot of direct debits to be stopped as people ran into financial problems. But because Ian has done such a fantastic job, people have actually, I think, needed the FIS more than ever. And so we've actually gained members, which is astounding. I would expect that each member, there will be, unfortunately, I think, redundancies. Construction is currently forecasting 10 to 15% less operatives by September. I think that each company will become slightly smaller. There'll be less work to go round, but I'm hopeful that this year, certainly, the membership won't dwindle. We can't forecast yet exactly what's going to happen next year. And John actually will back me up on this. We don't know. We're hopeful. We're keeping our fingers crossed, and obviously we'll do what we can to support members to get through it. So,
thank you. That's very positive.
Well done. Yes.
Michael Winston, you've asked a question, and then after that, I'm coming to Julia, and then I'll come to John Riley. So, Michael, first of all.
Hello, Helen.
Hi.
Thank you for that. Very interesting, because I'm involved in a multi-million building project at the moment, and had a long meeting today with contracts and lead times and supplies. And we did exactly what you said. We're not going to hold the builders or the contractors to ransom should there be a delay because of COVID. We've specifically excluded that from the contracts.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks. The big question for us, or that I had, was there have been delays, there's lessons learned, but how can we use that if in fact a second peak comes, and not only a second peak, but there's Brexit on the horizon at all. So
Yeah.
supplies and all of that. And I wonder what the industry has learned from this, so that it's better prepared to take some of that on the pin, as it were.
I think there's no doubt about that, Michael. I think we are better prepared. I think that if there's a second peak, construction this time will not shut down. I think in effect, we've done the hard work. So I talked about that health and safety task force and the fact that it was a massive body of work, which it was, but it's done now, it's there. I think that all the procedures are in place. We're not scared now. We did go into blind panic. I certainly did. I felt like I ran around like a headless chicken for several weeks. We won't do that next time. It's not as scary. It's actually not as scary as we thought it was going to be going back to work. It really isn't. And now that I showed you that graph where 40% of members felt that they could operate safely on all their sites, across all sites, i.e. they thought it had no impact at all. So I'm really hopeful, actually, that the second peak will not have the same effect that the first did. Brexit, I think that will be more of an issue. There'll be contractual issues, there'll be material supply issues. But to be honest, I think we need to get to the end of the year first, and yeah, it really will depend if that comes back into the sort of public psyche, really. Are we even? Yeah, I think people have forgotten about it. It's got not that's not correct, of course. They shouldn't forget about it, but yeah, I think even the government are trying to forget about it.
I don't know, there's quite a few deadlines coming up when if we haven't decided by then this is going to happen. Yeah. Anyway, Brexit may be a bit too big a solution to resolve.
And the other point is obviously a very serious concern for the industry is the supply chain and where the supplies there. And, we saw with COVID that this country is very much dependent on its imports for supplies. It's not self-sufficient. And I particularly, as one, I'd like to see that the whole of the manufacturing sector regenerated, that we grab back as much of that for ourselves. But that must be concern about the supply chain and how much dependency we have on other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredibly complex, that, isn't it? I mean, globalization has caused, very, very complex supply chains.
I think it's one of those things we didn't know, did we, until it all happened. And it all
That's right. Yeah.
Julia, can I come to you with a question? I know you put it in the chat room, but if you'd like to say hello.
Yes. Hi, thank you, Master. Yes, my company sent us all home on the 18th of March because we have one massive open plan office with about 200 people in it. Do you think, because companies have moved to these open plans, do you think going forward they may think about putting more partitions in future?
Yes, I do hope so, Julia. Yes, no, that's yes, they are doing already. So we use glass is we've become glass partition installers in the last month, and thank goodness, because a lot of our other contracts have been very slow to restart and get going. So there are all sorts of very innovative ways of partitioning off not just offices but desk space. There are dividers. You can use glass screens that go all the way up to the ceiling or down to the floor. I mean, once again, I've been amazed by how quickly things have moved during this crisis, and the innovation around that in particular has been astounding. So you're absolutely right, that is what people are doing. And I think that in large office spaces they will utilize glass partitions where they can, and then maybe people will be maybe going to the office 2 days a week, split shifts, things like that. I haven't seen, I'm pretty optimistic that people will go back to their offices. I haven't heard many people saying that they don't want to. In fact, I've heard quite the opposite, that most people can't wait to get back to their offices. But I think it will be clever systems of work to maintain the distancing. I don't want to. James Dyer has just said
I think we'd like a glass partition in the clerk's office, please, Helen.
yes.
No, but Helen, isn't it right that lots of partitions play complete havoc with the air conditioning? Because the air conditioning is all set up for open plan, and then people stick up partitions.
That is true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the ventilation engineers are getting quite twitchy at the moment about having to take that into account. Yeah. But I actually think I actually think a lot of these petitions, I suspect, might be taken down again afterwards, but let's see what happens. Keep our fingers crossed. I mean, the medical progress seems to be quite speedy at the moment. They're coming up with, you know, we're a little bit more confident, aren't we, about things like vaccines and so yeah, whether or not these glass petitions will then all get binned afterwards, we'll see.
Well, I haven't started you on sustainability, which is my other big interest. John Riley, would you mind saying hello?
Oh no.
I don't know if you're online when we had a lovely photograph in the presentation of one of your ceilings that you had. I don't know where it was, Helen. You didn't say. It was maybe secret, but
I actually don't know. I was being I asked specifically for a picture of one of John's award-winning contracts, and that's what I was sent. So I'm not. It did, yeah. It was very swanky, John. Anyway, and don't ask me a difficult question, John.
I'll try not to, Helen. My sincere apologies for joining so late. I've had some fun and games on a project today, so it's
you look like you're on site now, are you? You look like you're on site.
I am. So as we speak, so I've literally had to charge my phone back up and try and get enough juice in it to come and join. But but my as far as things where we are today in terms of with the FIS and the progress that's been going on through COVID, I think it's been absolutely amazing the way that that Ian and Jane and likewise the support you've given and the rest of the board to the FIS to actually help contractors navigate a way through what's really been a very, very challenging period. That's whereas most companies were able to furlough, the construction carried on. And we've been all trying to make it up as we've been going along.
But that's the. I think hopefully I got that across, John. I kept using the term judgment calls, but it was every single day. It felt like you made 10 judgment calls because you didn't really know. You didn't ever know if you were doing the right thing. And it's and you know this, but I've had conversations, phone calls with members in tears on the phone, literally. And I was in tears. I don't mind admitting it. I sat at my desk several times in tears. It was horrible. It's still not great, but it was horrible. And so I hope if anything comes out of this as a community, we have come together and we are stronger, and that's why I'm quite hopeful about the membership not dwindling, actually.
Yeah, I think that actually the FIS showed its best colours.
Yes,
because it came together at a time when people didn't know which way to turn, and actually you're stronger as a bigger unit. If you've got commonality in terms of approach, you feel like you're sharing the burden together. You're not feeling with it. There is someone else that you can go and reach out to and talk to, and I think that the support that it's given has been absolutely amazing, and something that until you actually get hit with a really difficult time, you never really know how it works.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of members have actually suddenly seen it firsthand.
Yeah. And the other thing to note is we're not in common with other trade bodies. Our subscription levels are very low. You know, it doesn't cost a lot to join. So that's the other reason I'm pretty hopeful that it's not something that, I mean, obviously everybody is going to be cost cutting, but it's not such a substantial amount of money that people, you know, that it will be the first thing to go.
Great. Oh, that's a positive thought, that membership will keep up. Now, I don't know, has anybody else got a hand up that I haven't seen? I'm not sure there's anything in the chat room for a new person, and we are nearly getting to 7 o'clock, and I know people will, oh yes, hang on, there was an, oh, I've lost my thing. Was that Nigel? Sorry. I've just completely, yeah, could you speak? I just completely whizzed my, yes. Hello, Nigel, here we are, there we go.
It was and still is for another, another 4.5 weeks. Helen, I have been in my 10 years through 3 different manifestations of FIS.
Yeah, AIS and yes, yeah.
And I have to say I'm more hopeful now than I have been in the whole of those 10 years that what you are achieving for the sector is as good as it's ever been. So that's an outsider's view, but I hope you'll take that as an encouragement.
Thank you. No, that's brilliant, Nigel. Thank you.
But on top of that, I know Garth, who's following me, will want to continue and strengthen the partnership that we have with you. You already use the courtroom for some of your London meetings, and that is an offer that I want to reinforce going forward. We want to be able to work with you as strongly and as forcefully as we can in the most positive ways. So I'm opening the partition between you and the new clerk, and I hope you'll walk through it.
Yes, we will indeed, Nigel. Thank you very much. Yeah, John and I we've been talking about that recently, and we're definitely going to go down that route without a doubt.
Great.
Yeah,
well,
because once again together we are stronger. So
absolutely,
and we can address all those things that we talked about apprenticeships and, you know, all the things that are going to be difficult and that people are going to find it difficult to support in the next year or so, but together we can find a route through that.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to end on that. Helen, thank you so much for all
Thank
the
you.
A wonderful
Thank you.
PowerPoint. We'll see what the recording comes out like. I hope it's
I won't listen to it myself. You should know. No, that's the route to madness, isn't it? Listening to your own recordings. No.
And I will do a write-up anyway, and that will be fantastic. So thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you, everybody who's attended. I hope you found it useful. As I said at the very beginning, we have 2 more coming up this side of my mastership, so to speak. 2 weeks' time, 2nd of July, and right from Voces 8. So a very different side of what we do, but as a Plaisterers charity, we support Voces 8, the singing group, and the work they do in the East London schools teaching singing. So it's a fantastic group. And then the 2 weeks after that, the 16th of July, Claire Gapper talking about a house in Rochester and marvellous plasterwork there. And you'll see a lot and hear a lot about historic plasterwork then. So I hope you'll enjoy that. But otherwise, I think it's time to say goodnight, and I hope you have something nice to do. Oh,
thank you, Alison.
Yes.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you to Garth and Nigel and Ali for putting it all together, and Helen as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.